My name is John Bramley, Vice President of Product Development for TigerLogic Corporation. So what I'm going to go to next is I'm actually going to go through a demo of what we call our MV Web Services Toolkit. Okay. Basically, what it supports is multi-value web services. Supports both D390 and MV Base 3.0 and above. Okay. We have a standalone web server that can be installed separately, but it can talk to any back-end D3 database or MV database as long as it's 9.0 or 3.0 or above. Okay. There. So let me bring the toolkit up. So the top panel has what we call our web service provider. So that's the server that you out there. What you could have multiple servers out there, by the way. You could put them out, whether you got them on Windows or running on Linux, you can actually talk to them through one SDK, right? This isn't tied to a single server, a single web server, okay? So if you could take the web server and put it out there, and then you decide where you want it to talk to your back-end databases. And of course, if you're going to take it external, you're going to need to deal with basically redirect through the firewall. And if anybody needs to discuss that, I can go through all that with you, how you do redirection through a firewall. But basically, it's got a lot of flexibility in it. So in here is where you actually define your web services providers. Down here is where you define your actual back-end multi-value servers, whether it's D3 or whether it's MV Base. Okay. So let me start out by creating a web service provider. Okay. So I'm installed local, by the way. The server and the client are sitting right here on this. Okay. So at this point, when I create this, I give it a name. I'm just going to use the default name. Okay. The admin user. And we have a default password for the administrator, which you can change. Okay, the admin user. By the way, you can add users, and I'll get into that a little bit. It's a local host, and by default, our port number is 3410. Okay, again, if there's a conflict, you go in here, you change it before you connect. You have to actually, you might have to change. There's a configuration you have to do on the back-end server if you change the port number. Okay, but this allows us. What this is just allowing us to talk to the web service provider. Okay. By default, this is running SSL. Okay, so when you're talking via the SDK to the web server provider, you're going over secure connection. Okay, all right. So I'm going to finish this. All right. Now what I need to do is I actually need to connect to this thing. All right. Once I connect, I can then look at the properties for it, which are down here. The stuff I actually just put in, and you'll notice it says use SSL connection true. We do that by default. There's not really an option on that. There's no real major overhead. Why not keep it secure under the covers, right? Okay. So what I can do is I can edit this information, which now starts to show me a little bit more. Okay. So as I mentioned, the web service provider has an interface for the SDK to talk to it. Okay. It also has embedded in it the actual web server. This is the web server that your web services are going to actually talk to. Okay. Again, by default, it will fill in the host name, which, again, is localhost because it's running on this system. The port number, I'm going to use 8181. There's various things like cache size. How many web services do you want to keep cached? You have the ability to change that. Now, when you cache a web service, the nice thing about this product is that you don't need to worry about flushing the cache if you change the web service. The way we work is that if you update the web service, we automatically flush that web service from the cache for you. The cache provides the ability that you don't always go get the WSDL information off disk, basically. It sits in memory. Okay? And then how many concurrent connections do you want to this web server is what that parameter is. Okay? We have the ability to log information, so if you want to keep an eye on what the web service is doing, what kind of requests it's getting, you have the capability to do that, and we have various levels of logging that we provide. Okay? And then, of course, you can size how big do you want the log file to be, so you don't let it just keep growing and growing. Okay? We do have this use SSL connection, which means we support HTTPS. Okay? All right, I'm going to go without that today, but you do have the ability to turn that on. So we support both HTTP and HTTPS. Okay? All right. So what I want to do here is I want to go quickly and again, I'll just mention, part of security in our web services is we support both the concept of a user and password, and we also support the encryption, what is that? Just give me a second here, because it's here, let me just create one of these. We'll see it. Anyways, this is the screen for managing your users, as I mentioned. You can actually go in and change the administrator's password and add whatever users you want. So if they don't have, you can, so a web service can actually be locked down by user password if you wanted to as a security measure. All right? So let's get in here and create a web service. Okay? So I'm just going to call this thing MVS, right? And I'm going to give it an endpoint, part of the URL. Now, things about web services, how many people are really familiar with web services? Okay? So you know the concept of the SOAP, right? There's a SOAP web service, and there's also what's called RESTful, all right? So the idea is that you can either, go directly through SOAP. It's a SOAP interface, standard interface that's used, or you can expose it through RESTful, which means you can actually do HTTP posts and HTTP GET, all right? HTTP GET lets you actually put it directly through the URL with your parameters in the URL. You can also run it through a post, which means the parameters are buried in the web page. Okay? Here's what I was talking about. So this is where you would add your authentication. So if you wanted a user ID and password. So what it means is that they would, whatever users are in the system that you've added to the web service provider and passwords, if they have any of those, they would be access to the web service. What we don't do is we don't give a specific web service a user or a password. If the user or password's in the system and they have it, they get to use that web service, okay? And then we also allow you to do the X509 specification to actually, which is an encryption. So in order to use the web service, you'd have to have the key, okay? All right, so let's just finish this up. And it's going to ask me if I want to create a web service operation. At this point, I'm just going to say no because I want to go a different route to show you that. I could create it there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, first of all, I'm going to do a create web service operation. Now at this point, I have not, as you notice down below, I did not go and open up a database connection to the back-end D3 server. And I've got D3 running on here. So you can either do it down here in this lower panel, or you can do it through the wizard. Okay, so right now I'm going to say, well, I want to create a new one, right? So when I pop this up, again, I'm going to use the same, it defaults to local server. I'm going through DM. There is no password on DM, and we're using our MVSP connector, which by default is port 9000. So the web server itself, or the web service provider, is talking to D3 and MVBase via our Java API. Okay, so we are leveraging our Java API for this technology. Okay, and so you have the ability to do and say, well, if I'm good here, and if these guys have not messed me up, which they did not, it's good. Yeah, you guys are happy, aren't you? Okay, so I'll tell you later what they did to me yesterday. So at this point, I actually got to connect. And once I connect, ready? Did I not hit that? Maybe I spoke too soon. There we go. All right, so now it gives me a list of all the accounts that are available to me on that D3 server, okay? These are all the accounts that have been enabled through MVSP, okay, only. So if you don't want accounts exposed through the SDK, you just don't allow them to be exposed through the MVSP server, okay? So we're going to use this MB demo account. Some of the things that you get with the web server, the web service itself, is you get the connection pooling. So for that specific web service, you're saying how many back-end connections do I want to pool? And you can have a minimum and a maximum, right? So for example, I want to always keep a minimum of 1 connection live. I can have up to 50 of them. So these will, the connections themselves could use, they will use back-end D3 licenses, okay? So you want to be a little careful of how many, when you build this, how many connections. But the advantage of this is that they're not locked to, web services in a sense is stateless, right? You got to be careful with that too. What you're running on the back end, you can't be, doing, record locks and expecting that at some point somebody's going to come back and undo that, right? So you have to be very careful about how you design your web services and what they actually provide, okay? So, but this would use up to a maximum. But the nice thing about this, we also have what's called a timeout. So as the connections go idle, we let them go. So it means the back end would be freed back up again. So again, it's the advantage of a connection pool, right? Set it up, get what you need, and then we will pool through those connections. And the worst case scenario is that if a web service comes in and there's not a connection, he'll wait, okay? So you just got to be careful when you're doing this. And again, you have your timeout. How long do you want that back-end connection to sit in the pool before you free it up, okay? All right, and again, that's at a web service. That's not at the web server level. It's at the web services level, okay? All right, so let's go on. Let's continue on. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to build an AQL statement, right, that I want to create a web service for. All right? So if I go here and I hit next, okay, I'm actually going to pick a file, and I'm going to use inventory. All right, once I pick the file, it's going to automatically populate the ADIs for me to select. You'll notice what's happening down below is I'm building an AQL statement. All right? So what I'm going to do here is, first of all, I don't want this one. So I've got to get rid of that. And I want to add some selection criteria. So all I got to do is say add. And here I'm going to pick description. And in order for you to feed a parameter to the web service, you actually have to put an @ in front of it and give it a name. So I'm going to call this @DESC. So as a part of your web service request, you would have to provide that variable, that value. Okay? So I'm going to enter this, and I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to put search -inventory. Okay? And I'm going to finish this. Oh, well, not yet. I want to put some sort criteria. So I'm going to say add, and we're going to put the description ascending. Okay. So again, you notice that, and I need to enter that for that to change. You'll notice that there's your AQL statement based on what it's building it for you, right? Okay. So I'm going to finish this. So now what I've done is I've created a web service operation in this web service that will basically support the ability for me to search inventory. I can edit it, or I can actually drop it if I want to. What I'm going to do here is actually what I want to do is I want to test it. So I can actually, through the SDK itself, I'm going to minimize this because I need a little more space. I'm actually going to, one of the things I need to do here real quick, so I have it available, I want to start that guy. Okay. So I can actually go in here, and based on the web service I selected, it puts in the endpoint URL for that web service, okay, and then it tells me the operations that are available. Okay, so I created the search inventory, so I want to go and actually, I'm going to do a wildcard on the word office. Okay, and I can go and execute this, right? Entered. Okay. All right. And when I did that, it actually built the SOAP request under the covers. Okay. We show it here so you can actually take a look at it, right? And then when you execute it, if everything's worked right, I should see some data coming back, and there it is. So what I'm going to do here, so you can see this, I'm going to do I'm going to put this in here. Okay. There's your SOAP response. Okay, you'll notice that we formatted the data by default, right? So it has it basically is there's a standard WSDL that is behind this that actually provides and defines what is this result going to look like. So we actually give you, based on the actual name of the web service operation, we give you what's called a row set, and then we give you the rows, and then based on the attributes that you've asked for, we basically provide the data. And you'll notice that if there's sub-values, everything in a sense is a sub-value, even though it could be single-valued. You'll actually see further down where you've got what would be considered multi-values somewhere like here. Okay? So under the format, I have two values, right? With the concept of a WSDL, what you do with the WSDL once it's provided, and it's under here, okay, there's the actual WSDL itself, which can be exported. You can export that WSDL, and you can actually take it and put it into, for example, Visual Studio, and it's called through service, what's it called again, guys? Service reference. Using the service reference, you can actually give it the WSDL, and it'll create all your classes for you and your code to actually run the web service. You can do the same thing with Java. You give it the WSDL, it will generate all the Java code that you need to actually communicate to that WSDL. Okay? That's the nice thing about this. All right. The other thing is that you'll notice that that was a SOAP request and a SOAP response that we run in the test environment. Okay. The other way you can look at these is if you wanted to run what we call a RESTful web service, because I set the web service to support both when I went in there and clicked on that HTTP GET, HTTP POST. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically do an HTTP GET by using a URL. So if I go in here, no, I don't want that. I want this. And that's basically the name that I gave it. Okay, you'll notice again, and it's just giving it in one long string, what I got back in that window that I showed you in here, right, is now coming back in the browser. Okay, that's the same data, right? I just went at it from a different interface, right? Okay, so you can get access to your web services either through what we call SOAP, through the SOAP API, or through what's called a RESTful web service. All right, you guys okay in the back still? Okay, great. All right. Okay, so let me just continue on. Robert, how are we doing on time? Okay, so I'm going to create now. I'm going to add a basic program to this. All right. So I'm going to pick that local server again. Okay, since I'm already connected, he automatically gives me the accounts. Again, I'm going to go into our MV demo. And by the way, as we continue to progress with our APIs and all this, you're going to see this MV demo account continue to grow with samples and data as we continue to build on it. So I want to basically, now I'm going to actually say I want a catalog subroutine. Okay, so I go next. It's gone out and picked them. I'm just going to pick a subroutine out of here. I've now got this subroutine called check inventory. And you'll notice it's smart enough to know what the parameters are for that subroutine. Okay, so what I want to do is I just want to go in with a simple item ID. But what I want to do is I don't want to come back with a string. If I do this and run this as it is right now, that string will contain a bunch of multi-values, which is probably not something you want to pump out. Well, depending on where the endpoint of it is, most likely you're not going to want to pump that out with a series of delimiters in it. So what you can do is you can come in here and say, well, I want to add, oh, that's not what I want to do. I want to add something. I want to edit this one. So I'm going to edit this. And I'm actually going to tell it that I got the output. Oh, by the way, when you get to binding modes, you can actually bind this as either a simple value or a dynamic array. And with simple values, you actually have different data types, and I'll show you that a little bit here. So I'm going to actually call this dynamic array. Okay. All right. Now I've defined the dynamic array. Oops. Okay. And I need to give this guy a name. That's why it's not letting me finish. Okay. I've defined the dynamic. I've created a dynamic array, but I actually haven't defined what's in it yet. So I have to finish this first. Okay. It'll ask me if I want to create the dynamic array. I say okay. Right. Okay. Now you'll notice with this web service operation, you notice I have this dynamic array associated with it. So since I haven't told it what's in there, I have to actually populate that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up, and I am actually going to start adding some variables here. So I'm going to add the description. All right, and I'm going to keep that as a string. I take a look at my notes here, so I don't. So I'm going to keep that as a string. The type in this case is single. I know there's only a single value for the actually is this for the description. I know there's a single value. When you create these dynamic arrays, you actually have to tell it what type it is, whether it's going to be a single, multi-value, or sub-value. And the reason you need to do that is that you have to build the structure that is going to come back in the SOAP request that can be understood by some outside process. In a sense, a schema, right? So you have to associate it. So it takes a little bit of work to understand that. So if you know that for that attribute, it's always going to have a single value, you would say it's a single value, right? So these first ones that we create, spell, all right. So I'm going to add a few more here real quick. I've got a retail price. That's attribute 2. So this is attribute 2 of the dynamic array that's coming back. And in this case, that is a decimal value. Okay? All right? And I'm going to show you how to shortcut this in a little bit here. Now I need a promo. So I'm doing a little extra typing here, which I can show you how to avoid. But I wanted to show you how we do this through this wizard. And that would be attribute 3 that's coming back. This is also a decimal, and I know it's a single value. And then I'm going to add, I got a couple more here to add. I've got quantity on hand. is attribute 4, which is an integer. Okay. All right, and then I got one last one, which is this is called format. By the way, this is a library of DVDs is what we're going after. So they come in they can come in multiple formats for a specific DVD. So we have in this case this is a multi-value, right? So now when it's a multi-value, I actually have to give it what we call an element to associate that it's kind of a nested element within the structure. So here I'm going to call this, oops. Available formats, okay. All right, so now I've created my dynamic array. I just have to make sure I save that. Okay, now if I go back in, I can actually test this web service, right? I have to refresh the actual web service itself. Okay, you'll now see that I've got this check inventory, and I told it the item ID was what I want as the input parameter. So I'm able to go DVD. Oops. That creates my request, and if everything's going right, I execute this, and I should get response back, which I did. It's always a good thing. And I'm just going to okay, so there's the SOAP request for that basic subroutine that I just created. Okay, there's your response. You can see that, again, I created a dynamic array called inventory item, and you saw that I've got a description, a retail price, the promo, quantity on hand, and you'll notice that the available formats, because I had multiple values for the formats, I had to create a nested structure within the XML. And that's where you see the available formats, and you'll see that there's two different formats. This allows us to create a standard WSDL that can be consumed by an outside, entity. And like I said, you can actually take this and take the WSDL, which again you can export. You can actually also do the same thing with this one, where we can actually run this and run this as a HTTP GET, and there's the same. Again, I get back the same data in the browser. Also, the WSDLs are available through the browser, so if you wanted to take a look at the WSDL for this web service, you can actually see it right there. That is the WSDL that we have generated in that process that I did that supports both that AQL statement and that basic subroutine, all built for you through the SDK. All right. So as I was talking about a little bit of shortcut here, there's a couple things that you can actually do that can shorten this up for you. For example, we allow you to, you can see under here now I'm actually looking at the D3 data. I can look at the files. And you can actually see how we're starting to build on this toolkit. As you can see that now I have access to D3 files. Eventually you're going to see dictionaries, the basic code editor come into this IDE. Eventually you're going to see a SQL browser introduced. So this will become the development toolkit for D3 and MVBase. So I'm going to just take and that same thing I did before, instead of actually going through the wizard, I'm just going to go and do this. And I'm going to drop it on that web service. And it knows that it's a file. So by default, it's going to come into the wizard. It's already going to have this stuff populated. And again, I can go back in and pick my selection criteria and my sort criteria and basically create the same operation, saved in a few steps. Okay? All right. Same with subroutines. What I can do is I can actually take a catalog subroutine from within this account. Again, I'm going to take that check inventory, and I'm going to bring it up here, and you'll notice that it will, again, gets me into the wizard, so it's just drag and drop instead of actually having to go through the point of actually selecting. It knows what multi-value server it's coming from. It knows all that information, so it builds that automatically for you. It's where you clicked on below. It knows, oh, okay, I know what server it is. I know it's a catalog program. I know what the name of the catalog program is. I know its parameters, so I'm going to just present you with the next level wizard. So this one I want to continue on, though, because I want to show you something that's kind of nice as far as you saw me going through the pain of actually populating the dynamic array. Let me show you something in here that's kind of cool. Just call this check inventory 2. I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to edit this guy again. And I'm going to change that to a dynamic array. And let's just make this little, oh, I'm sitting on that's me. All right, I'm going to say OK to this. And again, I'm going to finish it as I did before. You now say you want to create dynamic array. You say OK. I finish this. Once again, I've added this web service called check inventory 2. Okay, I now need to fill in the dynamic array. Now, before you saw me go add 5 parameters to the dynamic array. Well, let's shortcut that a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I know that I'm working with the inventory file. So what I can do is I can just go and do this. And it says, yes, I would like you to populate it. And there you go. So you'll notice that it knows that because of the ADIs, the attribute definition items, it knows, for example, that the retail price is a decimal. So automatically, it will fill in your data types. Okay. The one thing it won't do is that you have to actually deal with anything that's multi-valued. So if you want your multi-value stuff, you're going to have to actually go in and change it. So for me, I didn't want this in here, so I would just delete this. Okay. I know that the first 4 parameters I put in were single values. So if I wanted to, I could just edit this one, right? And I just want to make this a multi-value. And again, AV formats doesn't really matter at this point. Okay, and I say OK. So again, just some shortcuts on saving you time to create the web services. And as we continue to move forward, we'll probably be adding in other things that'll help you out in that area. But again, so what you've seen is I created a web service, connected to a web service provider. I created a web service, and you could create multiple web services. By the way, that MVS web service, I might have wanted to have just the search inventory, and I could create a second web service that I could put the check inventory in. Doesn't matter. It depends on what you want. How you want to define and structure your web services is all up to you guys. Okay? There is no limitation. You can put as many operations in a web service as you want. It depends on who you want to expose that web service to and who's going to use it, right? If you have a mixed bag in there that you want, maybe a partner or a partner company that you actually want to come in to get into D3 through a web service, you might not want to combine a bunch of different type of web service operations that are of no use to him or that you don't want him to get access to, okay? So again, when you're using web services, they don't necessarily need to be exposed to the outside world. You could very well use them internally. You could use them as a way to interface to other applications. You want to talk to D3, whether it's through Java, .NET, whether it's through, if you look at, other applications out there, various, package applications, they very well could have a web service interface for you to actually bring in, drop the WSDL in, and then there you go, you're starting to talk to D3 and pull your D3 data in, okay? And as I said, we are going to add the ability for you to pick up external web services and consume them through this interface, okay? And then be able to call them through your pick basic code. Okay, that's kind of where we're going on the web services stuff. Let's see. I think, Robert, was there anything? And as I said, you can do things with, and this is an area I had a little bit of difficulty yesterday, but we're going to give it a shot anyways. I have, and again, I'm not going to go deep into the code, but if I can actually get that turned off. Okay. Okay, we got some Ant scripts. Many Java developers in here? Okay, so we got Ant is a way for you actually to take your Java and build it into, in this case, we're going to build it into a jar. And so we're going to use Ant under the covers. We're actually using a utility called WSDL to Java, that WSDL #2 to Java, that you can that is actually part of Apache's open source code, and we're using that to actually take the WSDL and generate the Java code under the covers. So this is build, and I'm going to actually take the AQL web service that I created, and I'm going to run it through this. I was having problems with this yesterday. So what it's doing is it's going off, it's taking the WSDL, it's generate the Java code, now it's compiling it, and I think I needed to do a clean, or did I? No, it actually worked. Okay, so what that did is that actually took the WSDL, generated the Java code, compiled it, and ran it. So now that's running a Java client against that web service and producing the same output as you can see up there. Okay? So you can also, unfortunately, Visual C++ at this point, we are having a slight problem with the WSDL, the WSDL that's being generated. Microsoft's Visual C++ is having some issues with it, so we're working. I'm sorry, Visual Studio is having some issues with it. But I might need Mark's help here, but let's see if I can do this. What do I have to do again, Mark? Is that up? Oh, there it is. That's right. Okay. So we're going to create a new project, and again, Mark, I got to get to? Just say okay. I can just use that name, just a default name. All right. And then it's right here, right, Mark? And I'm going to say add reference, right? Oh, wrong one. Okay. Sorry about that. I don't need that. Add service reference. And what I need to do is, we got too much open here, huh? There it is. So what I want to do is I want to get the URL for this WSDL, which I'm going to get by. I need this. Okay, so now I'm actually telling it where to get the reference, and if this works, what's that? Go button. There you go. Okay, so it's doing this very same thing I did, where it's gone out and it's taken the web service and it's generated in this code. Did I generate C# code or VB code? Okay, but it could generate C# or C++, right, Mark? Yeah. Okay. So in this case, I've actually created it, and now, actually he's going off and generating it now. How would I get at the code again? This is not, by the way, as you can notice, Visual Studio is not an IDE I use very much. What's that? This right here? Okay. So you can see that it's actually generated everything you need for a project to talk to that web service. So you can actually use it within the Visual Studio environment, just extracting that WSDL. Okay? Anyways, that is our MVS, what we call our MVS Toolkit 1.0 for web services. We've got a little bit of cleanup to do with the WSDLs, and we are adding the export capability so that you can actually export the web service and then import it into another web service provider that you've got somewhere else out on, that you've already got set up. So once you create the web services and you want to put them into production, you'll be able to export them and put them into production. Okay?